Hey everybody, thanks for jumping on. We are going to give we're going to just a couple more minutes real fast. We have a couple of people that are still joining up, and then we're going to get started here in just a moment. Okay, great. So thanks everybody for joining us today this afternoon. Wanted to just give you a quick intro into what we're focusing on today. We're looking at zero trust technologies. We're looking at everything that's associated to it, as well as try to dive into what it actually takes in order to begin engaging into a zero trust approach. We took a little bit of a different approach to this webinar than we have for some of our other ones. If you've attended some of our previous webinars, one of the differences here in this case was we actually brought in one of our technology partners, Okta, to team up with us to help to deliver this one. And I'll get into why that was in a couple of moments, but just to kind of introduce things here, my name is Ben Dimmick. My title over here is I'm the manager of identity and solutions practice. My overall role is I oversee the teams that do our implementation services around identity, as well as some of our other practice areas. So I get a lot of opportunities to use a lot of different technologies and get into a deep level understanding of where these technologies actually work together and what's really crucial about them. In case you're not terribly familiar with Tevora, we'll just launch into a couple of slides real fast. Essentially, we're a cybersecurity consulting company. We focus on everything there is to do with cybersecurity. We work heavily on providing the solutions around cybersecurity, as well as providing various services, whether it's compliance, penetration testing, and so on. A couple of other pieces of information on us, and then we'll go ahead and get launched into the actual content here. We've been part of the Inc. 500, as well as we've looked at a number, we've engaged in a number of different compliance standards that have been central to our mission, as well as to our clients. So we do a lot of PCI, ISO, high trust, a lot of different compliance work on these various platforms. But without further ado, let's just launch into the content here. So we felt that first it was appropriate to give a quick introduction into zero trust, and wanted to make sure that we were framing the the picture correctly. So we started off with the question of why are we really doing zero trust? What's really the goal behind it? What are the drivers that are getting things out there? If you've been to any of the security conferences over the last couple of years, you've probably seen a lot of talk about zero trust. But one of the first things we're starting to see that's really fueling this is things moving to the cloud. We're starting to see that frankly speaking, just a lot of the infrastructure is moving around, and we're starting to see that the traditional approaches that we've taken to security are starting to become questioned, as well as their criticality within the environments are starting to be shifted around. So there's been a lot of changes there. The second part of that is that we're starting to see that credential-based attacks are becoming extremely prolific. These are happening everywhere. In the 2017 Verizon Data Breach Investigations report, they reported that 81% of hacking-related breaches were using some type of either stolen or weak passwords in some respect, and the numbers have just gone up since then. So we're starting to see that passwords and a lot of our static authentication mechanisms just aren't working anymore in terms of a security standpoint. And the third reason that the things that's starting to come up is around some of the weak decisioning and slow response times around password security and some of the current authentication mechanisms that we've been using. Biggest issues is that as some of the access requirements shift, as changes in workforce occur and so on, it can take a little while for some of these changes to get propagated across. And we also run into issues where, for instance, we're finding that machines simply don't always know how to respond to things quite as well as humans do, even though we're beginning to adopt a lot of behavioral heuristics functions and so on. We're still finding that with all of the various systems that are in place, we're ending up with some gaps in terms of getting security in that direction. So where we kind of see things going in terms of zero trust here, and I'm gonna dive into these, but Ivan is going to be touching on all these in a lot more detail. The first thing, just to keep this in mind from a zero trust perspective, is that zero trust is generally a journey. It's not something where you can necessarily just buy a simple solution and put it in place, and now you have zero trust and you're done. It's frequently an overall evolution that's taking place in order to get everything put together. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that. The first, I guess I'd say the first real goal behind zero trust is beginning to eliminate the reliance on traditional boundaries. And so by this we mean, for instance, just because a source is coming from inside of your network doesn't mean we necessarily want to consider that source to be a trusted source. There's simply too many things in place right now that cause internal user systems to become compromised, not to mention the insider threat that's commonly associated with these things. The next factor here is dynamic authentication. And the goal behind this, and again, Ivan will dive into a lot more detail on this, but getting away from the idea of static passwords or even static certificates for authentication and really switching to processes that allow you to have a one-time use approach is one of the important factors we're beginning to see as a crucial component of zero trust. Another thing that's coming up more often is device validation. So we're looking at, for instance, when users connect from the same computer they always connect from, that's a good indication to us that user is probably a trusted user, as opposed to when they're coming from a completely separate device. These tend to be factors in looking at the zero trust process. And then one of the last things here is intelligent decisioning. We really want to be able to have one central system that's able to meet the needs of all of our different functions in order to ensure that we're maintaining security around this. The crucial component to really keeping everything working here is that we found that this has to be an identity-focused approach. And this is really the biggest reason why we've worked with Okta on this, is that when it comes to zero trust, it's not simply a matter of again, let's just go buy a product and put it into place and call it a day. It really ends up needing to be an important component of the identity program overall. So having deep integrations into your existing identity platform is a must when it comes to zero trust success here. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Ivan, and I'll let him introduce himself. He's one of the experts over there at Okta on the Advanced Server Access platform. He's essentially been functioning as a program manager over there and leading up what Zero Trust is really offering, as well as how Okta is executing on it in order to achieve some of the objectives that I mentioned here. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ivan.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for that introduction, and really excited to be here with everybody talking about Zero Trust. As mentioned, my name is Ivan Dwyer. So I'm on the product team here at Okta, and I've been responsible for bringing a new product to market over the past year or so. I joined Okta via an acquisition, and I was part of a startup that was working on really the next generation of Zero Trust software. And we'll touch on what that is specifically in the context of Okta. What I wanted to do today is really kind of set the stage, not just for this new product we brought to market, but also some of Okta's big picture thinking around Zero Trust and how we're kind of helping organizations navigate the complex landscape, the ecosystem, and really take things in stride. Because as Ben mentioned, it is a journey, and Okta being an identity company. That being kind of the cornerstone of getting this right, we want to make sure that we're guiding our customers and partners on the right path so that they can kind of achieve that, Zero Trust nirvana if one exists, but at least do all the right things to get you kind of down the path. But before I really dive in, I wanted to briefly introduce Okta for some of those who may not be familiar with us. We're really the leading identity company, offering a very complete platform that encompasses both workforce identity and customer identity needs for things like single sign-on, lifecycle management, directory management, multi-factor authentication, and a whole lot more. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary, have over 5,000 customers who trust us with their organization's identity and access controls. And so when I say trust, our customers trust Okta as their identity provider. But let's talk about what we mean when we say Zero Trust security, because trust obviously comes in many forms. When I really break it down in its most simple form, Zero Trust is about how we make access decisions. And I think it goes without saying, and Ben set the stage really well here, is that our kind of traditional notion of the network perimeter as being the decision factor is really breaking down in the modern world. We have more employees and contractors working remotely from a wide range of devices to access a broad spectrum of company resources. And it's really hard for IT and security teams to figure out, how to navigate those heterogeneous environments, but more importantly, how to control access to those resources. This is really no easy task because you want to be an enabler for the business and making sure that the right people have the right levels of access. But you also want to be secure. You don't want to be granting access to the wrong services. You don't want to leave accounts or credentials laying around that could then potentially be harmful in the future. It's, you want to be able to respond to changes very dynamically and be able to kind of adapt across your entire corporate network, across your entire corporate landscape. And that's not an easy thing to do when you're talking about network controls, because at the network layer, we just don't have enough context to make smart decisions. You have these really binary decision points where if you're in the network, you're kind of granted access. And even if you shrink those decision points and shrink those networks, you're still left at this binary decision making. And Zero Trust really is all about kind of elevating that and talking about how we want to control access from a contextual intelligence standpoint. But this is not easy because we have to kind of redefine what a trust perimeter is, because if you can't make assumptions about the network and you're not making binary decisions, what can you do? Because you can't just declare the network untrusted and call it a day. That's not going to get you anywhere. That's going to open you up to an even broader attack surface. So what you have to really kind of think about is taking a macro view of your workforce and all of your environments. It's about kind of connecting, to people and resources securely. So in that sense, it really kind of reasons to make people the new perimeter, and that's kind of why identity is so king in this environment. And obviously, I say that at Okta as an identity company, we really believe that people should be how you think about the perimeter, because it really is about, again, connecting those employees, contractors, partners to the resources very securely. But in order to do this effectively, you have to shift those controls, again, from the network layer to the application layer. This is how you get away from making binary decisions. And getting that kind of core identity layers to set the kind of groundwork is really critical, because everything builds off of that identity. If you know who the user is, if you know what device they're on, you can be much smarter about the decisions you're making. But identity has kind of changed with this seismic shift as well. It's not just some static user record in a database. Identity is more dynamic. The user's changing teams, their roles are changing, their permissions are changing, the devices they're using are changing. They may buy a new iPhone the next day. You might have a device inventory system. They're moving locations. All of these things might potentially impact that person's identity's security posture. So that all has to become context if you're going to make smarter decisions. But with all of this dynamic information and dynamic decision making, you have to put the right controls in place, because those controls have to be able to adapt to those changing environments in real time. And you're continuously assessing trust. You're continuously checking the user's roles and permissions. You're continuously monitoring that device to see if anything's changed. If 0 day might hit and all of a sudden all MacBooks are deemed vulnerable, you want to be able to put in policies in place that you can actually adhere to that will then block access from those vulnerable devices. All of these things are potential scenarios that you want to have to be able to adapt to. But you need to have that identity layer. You need to have the contextual information coming in, and then you need the controls to be able to adapt. Now, this is a pretty seismic shift in thinking, but I really believe that if people do this right, we're going to see zero trust transform security departments in many of the same ways the cloud have transformed IT departments over the past decade. Security is going to be there as an enabler. The smarter the decisions are, the better you're going to be able to put forth the right workflows. Where I'm a user, I always, as an HR person, I'm always logging into the applicant tracking system at 9 a.m. every day from my desk. That's all information that, with the right context, gives you an ability to make a much smarter decision. You might have bad actors that you can kind of identify based on some patterns and be able to block access. But again, we're getting away from that kind of binary trust or do not trust at the network layer. And that's just going to make things a lot better for everyone. But it is no easy task, as we kind of mentioned. So Okta, we're really here as a leading identity company to be zero trust partners for a lot of our organizations. And we rely on our partners like Tevora to help navigate that with some of our customers as well. Now, I don't want to scare everyone, because zero trust is kind of a monumental journey. You don't really have to tackle this all at once. I've been a zero trust advocate for a number of years, and I would always point to Google's own zero trust journey through a series of white papers they call Beyond Corp. It was an internal initiative at Google. It was after a 2010 nation-state attack where the leaders at Google decided they wanted to rethink how they did corporate security, and they put together a crack team of their top engineers, unlimited budget, unlimited everything, and said, go figure it out. And what they designed was this amazing zero trust architecture that spanned the entire workforce, that allowed remote employees to access any resource securely without the use of a VPN. But that was Google. Google has a lot of resources, they have a lot of time, they have a lot of money. Not every company can go down such a monumental path. So I always say, if Google's Beyond Corp is peak of Mount Everest, what can we do today to kind of get you to base camp? And so that's where we're really kind of thinking about it from a maturity curve. Now, unsurprisingly, I really think that the first thing to get right is to unify your identity. So you've got a lot of different potential user stores. The more you can bring that into a single source of truth, the better you're going to be able to build and extend on. So if you have a unified identity, this is going to allow you to automate all those provisioning and deprovisioning of those people. And really only if you have that central identity layer can you then build the smart access controls, because you have a single pane of glass for your users. So we always kind of recommend to our customers to kind of bring in all the disparate identity stores and try to get everything into a universal directory. And again, this is where you can start inventorying and tracking where a lot of those credentials are around. This is a good exercise to go through anyway. You've got different identity stores, you've got different credential mechanisms. The more you can kind of bring that into a unified system, the better you're going to be able to build controls and have assurances that you're not leaving a bunch of things laying around like static credentials. Now, once you kind of get that right, the next thing to do is to start thinking about the authentication processes across all those resources. We at Okta promote our single sign-on multi-factor auth wherever you can inject those things. Start easy with your SaaS applications. Then you can start moving on to, infrastructure, on-prem applications, APIs. Again, it's all about, unifying access on top of that identity layer. And again, with credential theft continuing to be the leading cause of security breaches, this is really what I would call minimum viable trust, because this is a unified identity backed by central access controls. And once you kind of get to this stage, you're pretty far along this kind of zero trust journey. And from there, it's about just kind of getting smarter and being able to adapt to more contextual information. So this is where we start talking about context. This is where you start to introduce device posture. Device posture is very important. It's not an easy thing to do. So you want to make sure you've got the right identity and access before you start adding a bunch of device checks. Because device checks are kind of, they might be meaningless on their own without the right identity and access controls. So this is where you start thinking about endpoint protection, AV protection. But it's less about, managing and taking over devices, and it's more about being able to extract the right information to make those kind of smarter decisions. So again, we want to try to pull in a lot of the logic and controls into a kind of a central control plane where everything kind of feeding into it is all that user, device, location, network context, and then feeding out is brokering secure connections to the resources, whether they're a SaaS application, an on-prem application, a server, or an API. This is about as far as I've seen a lot of folks get, and pretty advanced. That means the holy grail here now is this, what I like to call the adaptive workforce. And I really think only, Google is one of the handful of companies that have really actually achieved this, where they can confidently say that all access to every company resource is fully authenticated, authorized, and encrypted based on all the dynamic policies of the organization. It factors in real-time dynamic user and device state, all of these things. And, again, this is Google. It's really nice to have that view as the light at the end of the tunnel, but you really don't have to tackle this all at once. There's a lot of things you can do today to kind of take this all in stride. So that's what I wanted to kind of set the stage for zero trust. Now I want to talk about one of those things that you can actually do today to kind of get you on this path with a meaningful use case. Now, I would say over the past couple of years, zero trust has been out there in the market as a variety of definitions. It gets used in a lot of marketing contexts. It gets used as this kind of model to kind of rethink everything. But what about use cases, right? At the end of the day, we all have to solve for various use cases, and zero trust, we have to be able to apply this in practice. And so this is where the new product that we're kind of talking about, Okta, what I've been responsible for the past year, really starts to kind of get down into the nitty-gritty with actual use cases. So I'll mention this. This is the acquisition. So actually, it was July of last year. Okta acquired my little startup called ScaleFT. We were about 3 years old here in San Francisco, as I mentioned, kind of working on the next generation of zero trust access controls. And we had really taken zero trust at the core of how we built our product. And it was really now taking that into Okta was an acceleration for Okta's own zero trust journey. Okta had a lot of the pieces to get this right from an identity and access perspective. What the ScaleFT technology allowed us to do was kind of accelerate some of that and put that into use cases like the server access, which we're going to talk. So, I was at ScaleFT for 3 years. I led all things product and marketing there. And again, now here I am at Okta doing a lot of the same stuff at a much larger scale inside of Okta. Now, there's really two, I would say, macro trends that this acquisition kind of speaks to. Obviously, we just talked about zero trust. That's just becoming, the dominant security architecture. But the second one, and I think this is really interesting, and I've seen this happen a lot over the past couple of years in IT and in security. We're kind of seeing a lot of convergence of a lot of these kind of disparate identity and access management products, solutions, or methods, trying to unify that under a single control plane as much as possible. And again, getting identity right, laying that foundation. If you can get that right, you can bring in a lot of these disparate solutions that are independently operated and independently managed under a single control plane. Not only does that make it easier from a management perspective, it also makes it easier from a policy perspective, because you don't have to write policy in 20 different places. That's the hardest thing about writing security policies. Are you sure that you can adhere to that across the different environments? And the more that we can see things kind of coming together under the central control plane, it's just going to be easier for us to have the confidence that our security policies are actually being enforced, and they're being enforced the right way. And that takes a lot of effort, obviously, but this was something that Okta recognized as a key trend, and that was one of the reasons why they invested in our startup, aside from all the great people that came along with it. So that was July. April, so that's still this month, just a couple weeks ago, we had our annual Octane user conference, and this was when we formally announced our advanced server access product to an audience of 4,000 plus. This was, as you can probably imagine, a very proud moment for me and my team to see our CEO, Todd, announce the product during this main stage keynote. But one I want to call out here is a major theme of the entire keynote and conference was around zero trust. It is becoming such a strong pillar of our organization, but it's also becoming such a strong desire and initiative across our organization, our customers. Any organization, no matter what size, can be looking at zero trust as a way to improve security posture, but also just improve the productivity across the entire workforce. And the more that we hear our customers talk about this, the more we want to invest even further. So let's talk about that at the infrastructure landscape, because this is where I see the first use case, the first meaningful use case of zero trust being deployed. And we touched on some of the trends already that are kind of leading investment in this. And again, more cloud adoption. More organizations of all sizes spinning up new workloads, migrating existing workloads to the AWS, Azure, and GCP, all the IS vendors. But with this comes a whole suite of complex identity and access implications. And each cloud vendor places a lot of that responsibility on you. It really could take a PhD to get each spec right. So one of the things we want to try to do is abstract a lot of that complexity across each vendor through a central control plane. And that's the kind of things that Okta's working on trying to do. Again, just the mergers of zero trust, but changing the access model means we need to think about how we change, how we deliver controls to critical infrastructure. Things that were traditionally backed by static credentials or protected by VPNs, we need to start thinking about that context again. And a lot of the reasons is because with all that cloud adoption, we're seeing DevOps and automation becoming just an increasingly important function across our customer base. And with DevOps, automation is the name of the game. But legacy security products, methods, they can be blockers in this regard. We really want to kind of offer our customers a very modern approach to infrastructure access that can really streamline a lot of that automation for highly elastic infrastructure fleets across any cloud vendor. A lot of these things kind of led to where we are kind of bringing this advanced server access product to market. Now let's kind of talk a little bit about why this is such a tough problem to solve in the first place. If I were really to break down critical infrastructure access to kind of one critical factor and why it's so challenging, it's really the credential mechanism associated with server access. So think of your SSH keys and RDP passwords. These are the types of things that are lost, stolen, and misused all the time, which Ben mentioned the Verizon DBI report. Year after year, we see credential theft just being that kind of leading driver of data breaches. And by default, the challenge is these credentials are static. They have no tie to identity. Really, I like to say possession is 100% of the law. It's really almost impossible for any IT or security manager to truly know who has access to what systems based solely on these credentials. It may be fine for one or two people to kind of manage their own keys, but this really quickly breaks down at any level of scale. This is a known challenge. So obviously out of this has kind of emerged a number of products and best practices over the year. Really the sole effort there is to protect all the keys at all costs. So we see a lot of vaulting, wrapping management layers, rotating credentials. These are all, a step up from doing nothing at all, but they're still kind of fundamentally rooted in that notion that it's the credential that holds the privilege to do the task. So even if you add a management plane around the credential, it doesn't really solve the problem of the credential holding the privileges. And that's really why I see that, no fewer breaches year over year related to some form of credential theft or misuse, because no matter how much you try to protect the keys, they can still be lost. So this is where zero trust kind of comes into play. I think with zero trust at a fundamental at the architectural level, we can really get to the root of the problem, because a key tenet of the model is getting away from that binary decision making. So in the network, out of the network, it's the same way of holding the credential or not. Getting away from that kind of binary decision making is something that you can kind of extend to this kind of critical infrastructure layer. So that means we're going to make smarter trust decisions based on the dynamic conditions surrounding that. But making smart trust decisions is kind of meaningless on its own, because imagine building a system that collected all the contextual user and device information, made smart decisions based on all these machine learning models, and then at the end of that decision, you handed someone a static credential, a shared key. That would be a wasted effort. So really, we need to solve for the credential problem the same way that we're solving for the access problem, where every time you make a decision, you mint a credential that exactly matches. So just in time, single-use credentials that exactly match the contextual access decision that was made, both in the scope of a user on a device, but also in time, at a very specific point in time of a single user logging into a resource. Now, a lot of times, I like to say that the best way to mitigate the risk of credential theft isn't to secure them, it's to basically render them useless. And the way that we can do that is by limiting their scope and value outside of a single request, meaning you can steal a credential all you want, but if it's not within that really, really tight, narrow scope, it's completely meaningless. Now, this is no easy task by any means. This is a lot of the stuff that we've been building, both at Scale Up T and now that we've kind of brought to Okta and are now introducing to our customers. So I'll just kind of, introduce very briefly here the Okta Advanced Server Access product. This isn't going to be an Okta commercial, but I just want to kind of mention this. It's a new product to our product portfolio. It works for Linux and Windows servers over SSH and RDP, respectively. But really what makes this kind of revolutionary is just kind of how it just works. We're really just trying to integrate with the environments and tools that our customers are used to, but we're not going to compromise on security. And it's all about getting rid of the credential and account pains. But also, having that central control plane for any cloud environment, we get to abstract a lot of the complexities of identity and access across AWS, Azure, and GCP. We also want to design for automation, really designing for highly automated elastic cloud infrastructure. We want to support your DevOps workflows with ease and not getting a blocker. But if you have any familiarity with Okta, and I know there's probably a range of folks who know about us or might use us at their own companies. But everything that Okta spent the last 10 years doing is kind of streamlining secure access to business applications. We're just doing the same thing. We're just doing it for infrastructure, but we're doing it in a very modern zero trust fashion. This means our directory product called Universal Directory, that's going to become the source of truth for local server accounts. We have a lifecycle management product which handles provisioning, deprovisioning of accounts. We do that now down to the server level. We're also, SSO is how we built our company. We're just extending SSO to SSH and RDP workloads. And we have a lot of contextual access controls around doing really smart dynamic access and adding multi-factor auth inline to workflows, but also being able to make smart decisions based on the information that's coming in, scoring, traffic, analyzing traffic, putting up a risk score, things like that is a lot of stuff that we're offering now at the infrastructure layer. Now, infrastructure access, obviously very complex topic. I just find it kind of useful to kind of abstract it down to its very simple form, where this just kind of makes sense as an Okta product that we can offer to our customers. I can quickly walk through how it works, and we'll see it really in action when I give a demo, which I'll do just very briefly. But basically, your users would install a little client application on the workstations. This is going to interface with your local SSH and RDP tools. And then on the server side, we run a little agent that's going to manage the local accounts and also capture all the logging events. Now, this is where we get into zero trust. Every SSH and RDP login is independently authenticated via Okta and authorized against your security policies, whether that's your sign-on policies or role-based access controls or time-based policies. All these things get enforced at the authorization level. Now, only once a request has been fully authenticated and authorized is access granted. And access is granted through short-lived, tightly scoped certificates that are scoped to that user account, the device that they're connecting from, and then the server that they're accessing. And it's this certificate that is used by the client to log into the target resource. And again, because it's short-lived, the certificate expires right away. It's rendered useless after that single login. And this is how we kind of call it zero trust. Because that entire authentication authorization workflow is independent and it happens on every single login. So possessing an SSH key is not a way to get into a server. You have to go through this full authentication authorization workflow. But we design this in a very elegant way so it doesn't actually get in the way. Because the last thing you want to do is to put forth a bunch of clunky controls that your system administrators are going to try to work around and they hate. We want to be able to do all this smart access, but to do it in a way that's not going to get in the way of how users work. Let me actually show it, because demos are always fun to actually see how products actually work. Let me pop over to my Okta console. So if this is the first time you've seen the Okta dashboard, this is the administrative dashboard where IT and security administrators can add applications where basically you're saying these users and these groups can have access to these applications, whether it's Box, Salesforce, Workday. We've got about 6,000 in our catalog, and then we do all the authentication and access controls to that. But what we're going to do this, we're going to do this at the server level. And when you're talking about server access, it's very different than logging into a business application. So this is really all you see from a Okta dashboard perspective, but you assign certain people inside your organization and certain groups to server access as an application. Those accounts get provisioned. So we do all the CRUD on users and groups, and then all of the group membership. So you might have an admin group and a demo users group. All of that gets provisioned from Okta to servers. Let's actually see how that looks on a server. I mentioned that we've got this application here. Let me minimize my webinar window so I can actually see it. This is the client application that I install on my workstation here to interface with my local tools. I'm just going to initiate a login workflow here. We talked about zero trust access. So first I'm authenticating. So I'm authenticating via core Okta. I have a MFA sign-up policy here. So this is going to send me a push, and I'm going to do that on my phone right now, where I am approving that. This is going to bounce me back, and it's going to say I'm authenticated as Ivan, the user. Now I'm going to bind that authenticated user session to this machine. So this is taking that authenticated user session and binding it to a client. This is a registered MacBook Pro. It's the device that I'm using. It's running this client application. So this is how we form what we call a strongly authenticated session, because we take that user information with a multi-factor auth and we bind it to a very specific client machine. And anything that changes now will be picked up automatically. But I can carry this authenticated session into accessing servers. So I have a bunch of projects here. Let's say I've got a bunch of servers here. I'm just going to pick one of these, demo server. Now, the way it works is we have a little CLI here. This is going to allow me to do a bunch of things, but there's some cool. So demo server, this is obviously not a DNS record. It's just a name thing here. I'm just going to type SSH demo server, and believe it or not, this is actually just going to work. I just remote logged into a EC2 instance on AWS via SSH. But I went through a full Okta authentication and authorization workflow. So what actually happened when I logged into that machine, and we can see this in the event log, we talked about making that smart decision. So it's the user account, which is my Okta user account. It's the device that I'm on, which is my MacBook Pro, to this specific server inside of this project at this point in time. That also represents the credential that was minted by our platform and issued to the user to log in. So all of that comes together to form a single-use, just-in-time credential that then I use to log into that machine. So there's no actual SSH key on this machine tied to my user account. I mean, no SSH directory, so there's no authorized keys file. So there's no credential management on the machine. My local account, this is my Okta user account, and I'm a member of these Okta groups. If my group membership changes on Okta, my membership changes on the actual server. This is all pretty cool stuff. The way it works is we have a little agent running on this machine, SFTD. When you install this agent and enroll the server with one of our projects here, it's going to take that authorization scope. It's going to look at the groups and look at the users that this server belongs to, and it's going to actually create all these local accounts with the local IDs, and it's going to grant sudo privileges or not sudo privileges. And then it's going to create all the local group accounts as well. And then that agent is managing these accounts. And I'm authenticating into the server as an Okta user account, but not using any credentials. And so all of that kind of comes together to form this, very dynamic kind of zero trust access control mechanism. But we're doing it at the infrastructure layer. Now, if I were to kind of back out and think about this in the broader spectrum, what we're really trying to accomplish is that central control plane where I'm authenticating into Okta as a user, and now depending on the resource, depending on my permissions on the resource, I'm being brokered secure connections to either a business application, a server, container, on-prem web application, API endpoint. All of these things, we're now going to just abstract the complexities, broker that connection, but we're going to do it in a way that adheres to the zero trust policies around user device context without any credentials laying around. This is why I call this kind of that tip of the spear use case for zero trust, because server access is a really good use case to solve for zero trust because of the sensitivity of the credentials, because you're dealing with administrative users who understand how a lot of this stuff works, and when you're introducing maybe new authentication workflows, they're going to follow and understand how this works in practice. And from a management perspective, not having to clean up keys or worry about server accounts is a huge win. So we've seen a lot of customers, big and small, kind of use this server access use cases that really tip the spear to get to zero trust. And get to zero trust, whether they're trying to get to Google Beyond Corp of Peak Mount Everest, or if they're just trying to tackle off use case by use case, this is a pretty meaningful one that a lot of folks get behind. I want to leave room for questions, so there's just a couple things that I want to kind of mention. Now, I'll close out with some of our design thinking. Now, this is very much how we treat zero trust in the cloud. And from a product architecture perspective, think about this beyond just Okta. Think about this beyond just the server access product. How we design security, how we design access management products very specifically to work in the cloud. And a lot of this is kind of maybe against traditional thinking, traditional practices and products that exist in this space. But this is really the methodology that we kind of believe in, certainly at Okta, and how we're kind of carrying zero trust into our customers. But a lot of traditional security products require a lot of heavy lifting. And really, if you're talking about cloud, you gotta be behind automation. Everything that we want to do, we want to expose as an API. All of the enrollment, provisioning, configurations, they should surely be automated. So if you're spinning up, large fleets of infrastructure across AWS, you don't want to be stuck retrofitting a bunch of security controls after the fact. You want all that to be streamlined and designed into your existing automation. And we're definitely behind infrastructure as code. That's just a philosophy that we believe in. And the more that you can kind of configure in a fashion that is unified, that's how you deal with scale. Scale is done by good configuration. So everything that we build is around automation. And I think that's thinking about zero trust at scale. You really have to think about it from an automation standpoint. And you saw it in practice. We're trying to get away from the notion of protecting the keys. We really want credential mechanisms that match the access decisions that we're making. And we want to make sure that everything is fully authenticated and authorized before handing someone a credential. But we want that credential to be very tightly scoped to that single login request. That's how we're going to get away from the dangers of credential theft and misuse, is to really keep them limited in scope. That's really the best way, I think. And one of the reasons why our product was so revolutionary is the way we designed that mechanism to mint those, what I call ephemeral credentials. Now, this is a big one. So traditional methods around access management might use shared accounts or root accounts to provide privileged access. Now, Okta, we're an identity company. We believe access should be about who you are, about as a user, and every login very clearly tied to a specific identity. This not only makes it easier to manage who has access to what, but also gives you a much clearer audit log of real user activity. When it comes down to it, you want to know who did what. And the more you can link that to clear identity records, the better off you're going to be. Now, a lot of times, a unified identity layer means you also want to have that kind of central directory for the users and then also their groups. But oftentimes, traditional methods might require you to replicate a lot of that information across different systems through some directory interfaces. So in the server world, this might be running an LDAP interface on the box. that can be really painful to keep configured. It's really difficult to keep in sync at scale, and it doesn't really play well with a lot of the local tools. You end up doing a lot of bolting on to your directories, different types of access controls. So we really want to kind of think about it from an account perspective. If we're talking about identities, we should have local user accounts on the machines that are very clearly tied to that identity. And instead of replicating directories across different resources, we just want to provision and push that actual identity all the way down to the downstream resource. This can be challenging depending on the resource. Web applications, it's pretty easy to provision a web application user account. We managed to solve that for servers. But think about things like databases. That can be really hard and something that we're still kind of thinking about how we're going to solve for at Okta. But generally, the thinking is, we want the accounts to be local to the resource and tied to an identity. Now, from an actual access control perspective, another common pain point you see is, these out-of-band workflows of checking out admin credentials or privileged credentials. It's just yet another blocker towards productivity. We want to design and extend workflows that are very natively integrated to just the transport protocols. So whether you're logging into a web application via browser or logging into a server via SSH, it should be very streamlined single sign-on process. And if you can do this effectively, you can just let people use the tools they're already familiar with without additional steps along the way. When you have something that's transformative, zero trust, adding additional controls that get in the way, it's going to frustrate your workforce, and that's going to make it even harder to roll this out. So the more that you can kind of streamline this and then kind of make it seamless, the better. Similarly with accounts, we kind of thinking about policies and privileges about who you are and what roles you have. And having a central control point, I think I mentioned this earlier, the only way you can really confidently adhere to your security policies is to have that kind of central control plane and enforcement point. What you see a lot, especially with infrastructure, is you might on the machine be able to escalate your privilege based on certain conditions. That's just really hard to keep track of, especially at scale. So we kind of want to pull out a lot of the permissions and logic around the role-based controls to that unified control plane. And that you can also adapt to changes. So if your role changes, your permissions change at that control plane. And you don't have to worry about how that gets propagated across your different resources. So the more that you can kind of extract logic into that control plane, central control plane, the better off. Yeah, we also very much believe in strong network security, but VPNs are starting to show their age. We believe in kind of bastion architectures. Certainly from an infrastructure access perspective, we just believe that putting things in the way like VPNs get in the way of productivity. So we're really trying to help design right architectures for our customers where you're very much protecting your private networks, but you're doing it in a way where the network isn't the decision point. It is still there to protect your resources, but from an access control perspective, we want to extract that and elevate the decision point to layer 7. And if you can design smart architectures with bastion hosts and private networks, you're going to be better off extending zero trust across your workforce. Another one we see a lot of compliance standards might require you to have a bunch of recordings of user sessions to replay in case of an incident. Now, from a security operations perspective, would you ever really go back and watch those recordings? Think about what you want from an outcome perspective. You want to know who accessed what and when. And you want to know that in a format you can effectively alert on, which is much better handled with structured logs that can be parsed, searched, and sent to your SIM. Now, I want to leave room for questions, so that's it for me. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. I really hope this was informative for you, and that you're thinking about zero trust at your own organizations. Obviously, I'm very excited about Okta and our advanced server access product, but I think about zero trust as really a transformative industry-wide effort that's going to make everyone's jobs a lot easier, and hopefully that helps set the stage and helps you think about stuff. So let me know if there are any questions from the audience or from any of the folks at Tevora.
So see, we got one question that came in so far. It was, will the slide deck be available and sent out? And yes, there will be a follow-up after a follow-up communication going out after this webinar is concluded, and we'll be including some of the material there.
Great.
Otherwise, any other questions? If anyone else has any questions, we have a few minutes left.
Ben, I'll throw a question at you, just for fun here. You saw the maturity curve slide. Where are you seeing, companies that you speak with? Where do you think they are, generally speaking, across that maturity curve? Is it kind of a range, or where are you finding a lot of people are landing and trying to get from one stage to the next? I can go back to
Sure.
it.
So I'd say from my side, most of what I'm seeing falls somewhere in stage 1 or stage 2. I have a few clients, I would say, that are well within stage 3, but most of those we're starting out with, they're kind of in a stage 1 or stage 2 approach. Where stage 1 we're still trying to build out our identity program. Stage 2, that's in place, and then the question of, well, now what, is starting to come up, and that's really when Zero Trust starts to become most valuable. But even then, we're starting to see some of our clients that are transitioning from stage 1 to stage 2 are adopting Zero Trust at that stage to try to show some of the immediate benefits that come from a more mature identity program.
Yeah, that's consistent with what we see as well. Definitely getting from 1 to 2 is a big step. But once you have 1 and 2, getting to 3 is it's not trivial by any means, but it's definitely an easier pill to swallow once you kind of have things kind of unified under that kind of control plane. But getting to 1 can be challenging. Obviously, different organizations have different levels of heterogeneous identity environments, whether you have a bunch of different Active Directories, or newer companies might be starting fresh and they have it much easier. But there's definitely a lot of potential legacy identity systems that still laying around that can be challenging to bring into modern systems. But it is really worth the effort, from my perspective, to kind of get that get away from fragmented identity and get into kind of a unified identity layer.
Absolutely. One of the things that we see too is that there are some organizations where they have such a heavily silotized IT approach that half the company may be in stage 3 while the other half is in stage 1, which is always a frustrating experience. But yes, that does happen as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We see a lot of that too. Those silos are definitely counter to this, but it's the kind of reality. Certain groups. I mean, certainly when you're dealing with companies that deal with a lot of M&A, a lot of times those M&A deals lead to more silos and independent organizations. And we've talked with large companies trying to figure out how to communicate with their acquired company, and they don't really have the right ways to do so, and that can be a monumental undertaking. But yeah, if you can, breaking down those silos is worth the effort. But we know that's a challenging one too.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Well, I think if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and we'll wrap up here. We appreciate all of you guys jumping on to join us here. We'll have a follow-up communication coming shortly.